Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Okay, I'm assuming Councilmember Siemens will be here shortly. We don't have any changes in this evening's agenda. Just note a couple things on upcoming agendas. Next Monday, January 14th, we have a public hearing, first thing at the meeting, on the proposed redistricting map. And at the end of the meeting, we have a work session on proposed revisions to the landlord-tenant section of the city code. The following week, Monday the 21st, the city is closed for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, and so the meeting will be on Tuesday the 22nd, and we have one or more items scheduled on elections. And my rolling agenda skips from January to March, so I don't know anything about February.
I can't.
It's a good idea.
Thank you.
Another recess is in order.
Right. Mine too.
So I will move along to a proclamation, and I want to read this proclamation because I think people should know about it, and I want to make sure that we publicize it and people know what's available. So this is a proclamation encouraging Tacoma Park businesses to participate in the TAPIT program. Whereas TAPIT is a network of cafes and eateries that allow the refilling of reusable drinking bottles in their establishments, and whereas the program encourages the drinking of tap water instead of bottled water or soft drinks, and whereas businesses who participate in TAPIT benefit by being listed on the TAPIT website, search maps, and TAPIT mobile GPS smartphone maps, and whereas TAPIT business partners receive a sticker to place in their window to notify the public that water is available there, and whereas the TAPIT logo also helps to show customers that the businesses who participate are civic-minded and recognize that sustainability matters. They reduce litter and waste, help to reduce our carbon footprint, and encourage healthy lifestyles by enabling pedestrians, patrons, and commuters to be assured of access to safe, healthy drinking water. And so this is something that I have formally encouraged, and I want to encourage businesses to partner with TAPIT and residents to take advantage of the opportunity to carry a water bottle with assurance that water will be available when needed. So I've talked with some of the executive directors of the various business associations, and anything that anybody can do to let businesses know of this opportunity, encourage them to participate, and encourage the public to carry water bottles and get their water from businesses that display the TAPIT sign. And this is a region-wide effort, and I hope people will take advantage of it. So that's now officially happening in Tacoma Park. We'll move from that to the public comment period, and this is the point in the meeting where anybody who wishes to make any comments is welcome to do so. If you can come to the microphone and identify yourself, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Nope.
We'll see.
Hi, Kathy Breckbill, Woodland Avenue. I have two comments, and they're both important. The first one has to do with recycling, and the website for the city indicates that it still recycles TVs. And when I got there with my gigantic TV, in fact, I was told not. Okay, so somebody, I've had this problem before, that the websites are not kept, and that's becoming more and more our way of communication, so hopefully the city will have somebody review this. My other topic is the pension system. You have two pension systems mainly, two defined benefit systems here. And I have in the past expressed my concern about the low level of funding for these plans. And in thinking about it, before the city comes to the next budget system, I know that Councilmember Mail has indicated to us that he's going to be working on trying to figure this out. And it occurred to me that since our police pension system is independent from the other employees' pension system, and a direct relationship with the city, that the actuary that develops the funding requirements for that might be a good place to start. If he were to come to the city and present to the council more information about how funding works, so that people will understand that the required contribution does not necessarily mean the adequate contribution for the long-term planning and funding of this. It concerns me greatly that public pensions are not well-funded, because I see this as a moral obligation to employees, that we've promised them something. And I say this from working with pensions for 25 years. So anyway, I had that suggestion and thought, and I do hope the city will look more into what's involved. It's complicated business. Thanks.
Thank you. We did have a presentation from, I want to label them correctly, were they the actuary? We did have a presentation from the actuary for the police pension about our last or next to the last meeting before we took a break. And they presented some interesting information, and I think the council has a better understanding of some of the issues involved, and that particular issue is on our list of items to look at as we start discussing mid-year budget items this month. So thanks for your interest and concern. We agree. Would somebody else like to comment?
Okay, so hello, I'm Emily and this is Margot. We're from the Young Activist Club. We want to thank you, those of you who met with us a couple Fridays ago. We're here to remind you that you said you could encourage the state to take action on polystyrene food serviceware. For those of you who don't know, it's a neurotoxin and a cancer agent. So we thought the biggest thing is that if the state could ban polystyrene food serviceware, it would be like the first state in the country. But if they couldn't, then they could ban the use of state funds on buying polystyrene food serviceware, as you have done here in the city. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And we will be talking later in this meeting with our city lobbyist, and we will bring that up as something that might be of interest, and see the best way to proceed on that. And thanks for keeping up the pressure on that.
Good evening. Thank you for working with the Young Activist Club, first of all. My name's Nadine Block, and I'm here on a completely different subject because I noticed, thanks to Tim's updates, which I get, that tonight you were talking about state lobbying efforts later, state legislation efforts. And one thing that I've been following personally is the LIBOR scandal. And I don't know if anybody here has been following that, but the LIBOR scandal stands for the London Interbank Offered Rate, and it's 16 humongous banks have been accused of and found guilty of price fixing, and it has affected trillions, $800 trillion worth of trades and exchanges. It no doubt affects a lot of people potentially in the city and in the state. We're talking about, when we talk about community debt, what we're really looking at is money that goes out of our pockets into the banks, and it's been repeatedly doing that, and this is another instance of that. So one of the things that's happening, and there's going to be hundreds of lawsuits. Is anybody following this? Okay. So I have some information I can share with you. I'm not an expert, but the real bottom line is that it could be worth trillions and trillions of dollars to you and to us personally, to the country as a whole, and specifically to pension funds and anybody who does business in any kind of swaps or trades, which is a lot of the business of the city or the state. And so we would like to, and the City of Baltimore and the Firefighter and Police Benefits Fund in New Britain, Connecticut have already put in lawsuits against the banks that have been found complicit in this LIBOR scandal, there will be hundreds of lawsuits. And what will happen is that the banks are going to come to people and ask them to settle for pennies on a dollar in giant class action suits. What we would like to see, we being the general group of people following this, is cities and states making pledges to at least calculate how much money has been lost to the big banks in this round of scandal. And it's only this round, right, because it keeps happening. So there's nothing moral about it's not a moral debt issue. We're talking about the fact that we have actually lost money to people who've swindled money from us. So that's what I'd like to ask the city to do. I don't know much about the city finances, so I'd be happy to sit down with somebody who does know and see what implications there are for specific city finances and how much money you lost in this, and then take it to the state and ask the state to pledge to at least calculate what's been lost, whether it's in whatever the paper it's been lost through securities, pension funds, et cetera. So.
Thank you for.
I don't know who to follow up with.
I'm not. Yeah, because I'm not sure I'm not sure how we might be involved in that, but it's worth looking into. Councilmember Councilmember Schultz and then Councilmember Romero.
Yeah, as I understand it, LIBOR is one of the most common methods other than you using U.S. Treasuries as a measure for banks in Western democracies, capitalistic countries, to determine how to base their rates on loans. And as you said, it's a rate that's contrived daily by the input of all of these some of the world's largest banks. And what basically has happened during the downturn in the European economy, that they more or less conspired to keep their rates higher than they were actually doing that. And they had various reasons for doing it, and that's not worth getting into at this point. But the simple fact of the matter is that it meant that everybody who got a loan, whether it's a municipality or somebody getting a business loan or a real estate loan, was probably paying more in interest than they were supposed to, because the LIBOR rate was calculated wrongly and unfairly. And so it was. That's the basis behind what you're saying, and of course everything you said comes from out of that. And to the extent that the city has borrowed money, which it usually does through the aegis of the state of Maryland, it could very well be that we ended up paying more on the municipal bonds that we floated than we should have. Who knows?
Thanks for that clarification, Councilmember Romero.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to ask a follow-up. Do you know of anyone providing services to try to calculate those sorts of?
Yeah, actually, there's at least one law firm that has offered to calculate for anyone who'd like help in calculating it in Minnesota. I mean, it's a big deal. They have to have access to a whole bunch of documents and data, but they've offered to do it pro bono, thinking that once that happens, you'll want to litigate, because there are a number of suits pending, and they figure that many people will, because there's no other way probably to get any money, any great percentage of money back on the money we've lost. I mean, these banks, it's not that I'm just saying, oh, maybe they set these things. They've already been found guilty, and there's already, I mean, the amount of money that we're talking about would shut down the entire economic system, the banking system as we know it today. $800 trillion worth of financial securities and loans globally are tied to this. So the money that I would say the community doesn't expect that we're ever going to recoup dollar for dollar what was lost or taken from state coffers or city pension funds or whatever it is, but people expect that it will give us leverage to actually get a handle on what's happening now with interest rates, and particularly with foreclosures. And I'm not up to date with Tacoma Park foreclosures, but a lot of cities are using this as leverage to talk about how do we actually use our eminent domain or other ways of recouping losses to lift people out of economic devastation, for lack of a better word. So this is part of that. It's not about whether or not they were nice or not nice. These guys have been found guilty, and it really has impacted across the board people everywhere. And so it's not about the fact that we mismanage our money and therefore we're global, therefore we have a huge debt. It's about we've actually been cheated out of the money that we deserve.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to speak with you tonight. My name is Amy Byrne. I am a resident of Tacoma Park, and I'm also a member of the Tacoma Park Volunteer Fire Department just up the road. Through the generous grant of the Tacoma Foundation, we have the funds to pilot a junior firefighter program and for middle school aged youth 11 to 13. I just wanted to stop by and tell you guys a little bit about the program, or anyone else who's tuning in tonight, whether they might be interested. The program is going to be running every Sunday from 12 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. and runs for 14 weeks, beginning with a family and student orientation on January 27th. It is open to applications only. We have about 12 youth, or that's what we're hoping for, 12 youth that in the 14 weeks come together and learn about basic first aid, emergency preparedness, EMS skills, and of course get to ride on the fire truck and play with the water hoses. During those 2.5 hours, they will be provided with a healthy and balanced lunch, homework help, and team building exercises. The projected outcomes of this program are increased participation in community life, understanding the need and respect for our fire, EMS, and police services and other civil servants such as yourselves. Gain life-saving skills and soft skills needed for collaborative societal benefit and personal growth. We hope to elicit excitement about the program from youth from various backgrounds and want to make sure everyone interested knows this program will be given free of cost. I have brought flyers for anyone that's interested. They are in English and Spanish. For those interested, they can call the fire department or email me at tacomaparkvfd@gmail.com, which is Tacoma Park Volunteer Fire Department, so vfd@gmail.com. And thank you for your time.
What age range are you
The
looking at?
age range would be middle school, 11 to 13 years old.
Thank you.
Give us the email again.
Tacoma Park VFD
at gmail.com.
at Gmail.
Thanks very much for bringing that program to our attention.
Of course, no
And
problem.
if you leave the flyers, we can make them available to people
right.
and make sure that people know about this.
Sounds good. And my name is Amy Byrne. I'm the one that's running the program. So
Great.
What's your last name, Amy?
Byrne. It's a hard one. It's B as in boy, E-A-R-N as in Nancy, E. And the fire department will be very mad that I didn't actually use the correct words for the B and the N. But thank you very much.
Thanks again. And Mr. Lovelace.
Okay, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, your official peace delegate. A couple of things I want to bring up tonight. One is welcome back from the recess and Happy New Year to everybody on the council and the mayor too. And also, thank you for fixing that speed bump as we come in that door. It's a lot different now when you come in. You don't just, like fall over the mountaintop and over the cliff. And I don't mean a fiscal cliff either. But anyway, one thing I'd like to do is to bring up is something really tragic happened over three weeks ago in Newtown, Connecticut. The Sandy Hook school was shot up by a crazy man with a gun, an assault gun to boot. He stole off his mother and he shot the school up after he killed his mother. 20 children had died. All elementary school kids had died. And 6 adults have died, along with himself. Turned the gun on himself afterwards. And one thing I'd like to see Tacoma Park do is see what we can do to educate the public that we do not need guns. We don't need them. I don't need a gun. I don't want a gun. And I'd like to see what the city could do to to speak out against the widespread use of handguns around this country and assault rifles. I'd like the city to speak out and ask Congress to have a ban on those assault rifles. And those assault magazines, too, the ones that carry over 30 rounds a shot. I'd like to see those stopped. As a peace activist, I don't see any reason to have those in our schools and in our towns. Because you never know who's going to get hit with one the next. I could be hit with one in a ricochet. You don't know. I mean, anyone could be hit with one. You could be hit with one. I could be hit with one. They could be hit by one. And there's too damn many guns out there. And I'd like to see what we could do. Maybe we could pass an ordinance asking Congress to stop the sale of these guns and to ask for more gun control. I would love to see that happen. It could save a lot of lives. And it is a Tacoma Park issue. Everywhere it's an issue. Because anyone can be killed by a handgun. There's too much tragedy going on. There's too many of these shoot-ups going on. The Concubine High School over 10 years ago, it should have been a warning to all of us. Every single one of these shoot-ups are a warning to all of us that we are losing our kids, our youth. We are actually losing our communities to these people with these guns. People with problems, take it out with the guns, go down at the town and shoot it up. And there's no sense in it. We got to speak up against this. It ain't going to hurt to speak up. We have to speak up against these weapons. Thank you for letting me share. So please, Mayor, please do something about that council. Thank you. Maybe we could ask the police to have a buyback program. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Lovelace. I do want to let people know that after that incident, I did join the organization Mayors Against Illegal Guns. That's chaired by Mayor Bloomberg of New York and Mayor Menino of Boston. And that organization is working furiously to try and make some changes and has a day coming up January 16th, lobbying in Washington, and some other events going on as well. And I think that the City Council would be very disposed to doing whatever we can to try and make our voices heard as the country considers what to do about guns.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you all very much. We'll now move to council comments. Councilmember Schultz.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back. It seems like the December break was 2 or 3 months long. I feel like I'm coming back from summer vacation. So I'm really pleased to be able to be back and get back to the city's business. The issue of guns is something that has been weighing on my mind terrifically heavily for a lot of reasons, which I needn't go into. And I'm going to have a lot to say on this going forward. But I do think that this is something that we as a city need, as a city, to make a statement on publicly, whether we do that by resolution or some other physical act. I'm not sure how to do that. But I do think that the events in Newtown, Connecticut will have the potential to make a significant change in America's attitude towards guns. And that this is, even though this is yet another mass killing, this one seemed to strike our hearts in a way unlike almost any of the others since perhaps Columbine, as tragic as all of them have been. And we know, as sure as we're sitting here tonight, that this is going to happen again. It's just a matter of time. We see these events, smaller versions of these events happening frequently. Some of them get reported in the news. Some of them get passed over fairly quickly. And I think all of us, I think we can most of the people in Tacoma Park will probably come together with the same kind of point of view on this matter. My feelings have been really raw on this whole issue about guns. I understand, I respect the Constitution and the amendment that gives us the right to own guns. But the result of guns in this country that is not resulting in citizens feeling safer because they have guns. What it does is that it creates gun ownership, or flagrant gun ownership, causes fear. And the more guns there are, the more fear there is. And the more these events happen, the more talk that there is, and the more talk and discussion there is, the more people are afraid. And this is no way for us to live in a democracy in the 21st century. And so something has to be done about it. There's so many different proposals. I was listening to Jamie Raskin speak yesterday at a brunch, and our senator in the State House, and he has a whole lot of ideas that he is working on. Some of them are pretty exciting, and hopefully and I expect we're going to see a lot of proposals come before us, before the Senate and the Assembly in this session of the Maryland legislature, and that's exciting too. But I do think we have got to put a stop to this kind of terrorism. I think the irony is that we've got 60-some thousand soldiers fighting a war in Afghanistan that is allegedly designed to halt terrorism, and yet we cannot even, in our own country, protect our schools. And you have to wonder, here we are worrying about terrorism from people who live halfway around the world when we have terrorists amongst our midst, and we're helpless to do anything about it. It's like termites eating away at our own house when we're out not paying attention. So I can go on and on about this, and I should not do this, talk for so long, but I would ask and encourage us, those of the people of the city of Tacoma Park, to get together and voice their strong feelings, because now is the time to all of us to lean and put all of our efforts, our emotional and intellectual efforts, behind these causes to get guns under control in this country, so that while we can respect the Second Amendment, we can also bring some peace and sanity and a sense of safety and security for all of us, not just our children, for the adults and our police department who's out there trying to protect us. Thanks.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Mine's a little more lighthearted than that, though I strongly agree with Councilmember Schultz and the comments that have been made about guns and gun control, especially assault rifles. But, so, I've been a bit out of the loop here through these holidays. I've been totally sick for the last 21 days, and before I got sick, my computer went bonkers and gave up the ability to work. It's called a crash. Ugly. Jack Cohen took it to ATSI, which is the computer shop right at the junction, and what great service. Fixed and back up and running in a few days, but then I went bonkers. I gave up the ability to work. It's also called a crash. Ugly. But I'm back on the mend and finally back on the computer, so I'm wishing all of my colleagues and everyone out there who is listening a very happy and healthy and prosperous new year, away from any more financial fiscal cliffs. We want to be done with that. I know there's going to be more stuff coming down the road, but the cliff may be, hopefully we're finished. Now, here's my standard first of the month show and tell chat. You should have gotten your Tacoma Park newsletter for showing and telling. You should have gotten your Tacoma Park newsletter this past Saturday, delivered by the United States Postal Service. It's a great read and should certainly be pulled out of your newspaper recycling and read from cover to cover. It's filled with a bazillion things to do during the month of January in our fair city. But one of the things that didn't make it is very near and dear to my heart, and that is celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I had a dream too. It wasn't quite the same dream that he had, but it was about a yearly celebration of the very special day in my own hometown. And Tacoma United, Cheer, Tacoma Park, Community Action Group, and the Recreation Department have made it happen. This is the second year of the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I, silly me, thought it was Saturday next. It is not Saturday next, it's Saturday this. It's this Saturday, the 12th, starting at 1 o'clock. There are service activities, there are planned service activities where groups will go out in the around the area and take care of things, picking up trash, doing whatever needs to be cleaned up. There are arts and crafts, documentary videos, and an evening celebration from 5 to 8 p.m. that if it's anything like last year's celebration, it will move your heart. For further information, you can call the Tacoma Park Recreation Department. I will be there in the evening to bring my very special international dish. It's called pizza from Pizza Roma. It's my standard fare. So this is the flyer. It's this Saturday, the 12th. A really fabulous, fabulous day of celebration and excellence. So, on to Gold Stars. We have to have Gold Stars. There were so many Gold Stars and there's so little time, but this one stands way above the rest for action over and above the call of duty. So here's another great Tacoma Park partnership that served the community. Old Tacoma Business Association partnered up with Historic Tacoma in a Tacoma Park First. A picture on Santa's knee. Great gobs of children and one senior adult had the opportunity to sit with our very own hometown Santa Claus, and this is where the huge, magnificent Gold Stars come in, because the Claus was none other than our own very special Mayor Williams. He's already done so much in promoting our fair city regionally, in the state, in the county, and it sounds like nationally at this point, as a mayor joining a gun control kind of a group. But this was a very precious and wonderful thing for him to do, and very special for all the children and one senior adult. That would be me. Here's the picture. Me and the mayor. I'll pass it right down. You can see. Very nice. Nicely done. Pass it down. That's it from my side of the mountain. You all are the best, and you will never, ever know how much I really, really do appreciate you. Thank you.
Just want to let you know that you weren't the only senior who sat on Santa's knee.
Well, I was the only one I saw.
Thank you, Jeff.
No, there were others. I'll just mention the two upcoming things that I wanted to make sure people remember. Remind my colleagues that this Wednesday is the opening of the Maryland legislative session for this year, and the Maryland Municipal League will be hosting our annual reception, and all of us are encouraged to attend. I'm not sure how many of us are going. I'm going to be in Annapolis pretty much all day, so I can't offer a ride, but I can offer a ride home. And it's going to be at the Maryland Inn between 5 and 7. And so if people want to organize and carpool down there, it's a good opportunity to meet with other municipal officials and state officials on the opening day of the session. And then I wanted to ask a question that doesn't necessarily have to be answered this minute, but I wanted to make sure that we take an opportunity, if we wish, to testify at a county council hearing on January 17th, and this is the tree canopy bills, the county council bills 3512 and 4112, and these are concerning some proposed restrictions on the ability to take down trees and both in the public right-of-way, which wouldn't necessarily affect the city because we have our own right-of-way and our own tree rules, but this would be something that would put restrictions in the county. And the other one is also to change how anybody needing a disturbance permit would be allowed to deal with trees. And so if we wanted to take a position, if we wanted to testify, we might want to consider that.
Yeah, actually, I need to look back into that because I think we did get some information that it could also affect Tacoma Park. And so I haven't focused on it lately, but I'll go back around and find out what we need to do.
So that would be a week from Thursday, and so if we wanted to take a position or deal with testimony, we've got a week to put it together, but I just want to put that on people's radar and make sure that if we want to do that, we can do that. I don't see any other comments, so we'll move along to the city manager's comments.
I just have a couple. Welcome back. This morning, I went to represent Tacoma Park at the ribbon cutting for the K9 bus line, which was just terrific, and cold in the morning out there. Former Mayor Kathy Porter, who's a board member, was kind of the hostess for the event. Ike Leggett was there, Muriel Bowser, a number of Richard Sarles from WMATA, Councilmember Berliner, Councilmember Reamer were there, and got a good amount of media coverage, which was nice. And I think that one of the things that I found was a little bit interesting is that it was pretty much marketed by the Montgomery County officials as the next step to the rapid transit bus system. There was not quite as much emphasis as I would have liked on how this really does move a step forward to many of our plans for New Hampshire Avenue. Nevertheless, I thought it was a positive thing to see everybody there, and it was a nice thing. Muriel Bowser gave a nice shout out to Tacoma Park, which was a good thing. The other thing I want to mention, it's not right away, but the Flower Avenue Green Street Project community meeting is scheduled for January 17th, and that's kind of the first chance that folks in this area will have a chance to look at what the consultants have kind of come up as a concept and see if that makes sense to people, and to really get down on the block to block looking at what that involves. So that's kind of an exciting thing to put on your save the date. That's Thursday, January 17th, 7:15 to 9:30 at Wilkinson Hall on the Washington Adventist University campus. Several people mentioned the website. As you know from some of the information I've shared with you, we're moving quickly as possible to transition to the new site. Many sections of the current site were taken down even today, so it's really going to be a transition time for the next few weeks. Please let me know when there's a problem, but we are trying to do that transfer, and it's going to be a little complex. I ask for your patience, but I also ask you to let me know if there's a problem.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes.
When will the city's version of the Flower Avenue project website be turned over to the consultant?
I think tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the city manager? Seeing none, we will move to adoption of minutes. We have two sets of minutes from November 19th and December 3rd. Would somebody like to move approval of the minutes?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Seaman, second by Councilmember Daniels-Cohen. Any corrections?
I sent some minor corrections to the city clerk.
Okay. And I also gave her some. Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. We will now move to our first presentation of the evening, and this is the recommendations of the Small Community Grant Review Committee. And I see some of those folks here, so if you wanted to come forward and use the podium, and depending on how you want to do it, how many people
I
gather
think we got
around?
it covered. If we need, well, why don't you sit here if you need, somebody else needs to come up. I'm Julie Evans from Ward 4. We've got Leslie Perry from, I think it's Ward 2, and Jackie Schick from Ward 3.
Okay, and if you need that any higher, there's a button right there at the edge on the left. And
Oh, okay.
it'll take it up and down.
All right, I think I'm good.
Okay.
Are we good? Okay, so, let me see, just one sec here. So we met last month to review the applications that were received for the Small Community Grant Program. There were 4 applications received by the deadline. First, before I get into that, I want to thank Jesse Clark for coordinating the efforts and educating the new members, and I was very pleased to have a good, lively discussion on that. In addition to the 4 applications that were submitted specifically for the Small Community Grant Program, there were 2 sort of holdovers from the Community Block Grant that were referred to us to consider for partial funding. Of the 4 applications that were received, the one for EduCare, we, after seeing that there was $9,000 in funds available under other city funds and holdover from last year, upon consideration, the consensus was to not fund that one. Of the other 3 that were submitted under the Small Community Grant, those were, all 4 actually were well-written and worthy proposals. So, we recommended for Old Tacoma Business Association, that's the Take a Seat, Recycle, public sculpture, to fund in full, the $2,500. Let me see, the Tacoma Women's Business Network workshop on website development, we recommended that that be funded as well. And for the Tacoma Jazz Fest, most of that, the part that covered the workshops, the $2,000 out of the $2,400, we recommended. The 2 applications that were submitted for the community block grants, it was hard to separate out any part of that could really fit the bill. It was a little bit of a square peg in a round hole to some extent, and we after the full discussion, we decided that what we had recommended was $7,000, and so this we asked if Ms. Clark could advertise to go for a second round of applications, and if these parties wish to, write up something directed more at the what's intended for the Small Community Grant Program, that could be considered, as well as opening it up to other organizations. So, I'll open it up. That is pretty much, I think, a good summary of the report.
Thanks very much for your work on this, and I think you laid out a pretty clear delineation of the way to move forward. My colleagues have questions. Councilmember Schultz.
The OTBA's sculpture, where is that supposed to be, or proposed to be located? Do you know that? Was those kind of particulars provided to you?
I know where it is.
Yeah.
I don't.
Maybe the only one here that doesn't know this.
Right. I had the trees last year and the bicycle sculptures the year before.
So it'll be various places.
Various places.
Oh, that sort of thing. Okay, now I understand.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And then that gets auctioned off at the Tacoma, Street Festival, and ends up, here and there throughout the area.
And then for the Tacoma Women's Business Network, how would the $2,500 be applied? You mentioned to partly to develop a website, and some sort of, I mean, is it going to go all for that? I'm just curious as to how it would be spent.
The application, you speak up, come up to the microphone.
They were talking about developing their website further with a portal for the membership and also to help support their workshops.
Okay.
They've had several workshops for women, and so part of the 2,500 would be the website development and the workshop support.
I would just sort of be, I don't think I had the benefit of seeing their proposal, but I would assume that their proposal talked about what they've accomplished over the last year. And I mean, I'm supporting the proposal. I think it's great. I just was curious to know how well they're doing, how it's coming along since the organization kind of gathered itself together last year, or earlier. Yeah, I guess it was last year.
They did. And they held a couple of workshops last year, and it's primarily with the holding additional workshops.
Okay. Well, I don't
And
want
the
you to
data.
spend a lot of time
Yeah.
on this. I can find that out later on my own.
Their application stated that they kind of parlayed the funds they received before and got matching dollars and so forth. So they did a good business approach with the grant last time, with the funds they received. And they don't recall the exact amount that they received last time. It was a small.
Okay. Well, we don't normally, with these small grants, we don't really make a policy of following up and asking for people to kind of show that how they spent the money or all that. We just want to know that they used it and they tell us that they used it
I
for
think
the
the city clerk
purposes.
can provide a little information on that.
There's two things. One, we do require a report at the end of the period, which I could certainly share with the council. In addition, the funding is provided on a reimbursement basis so that they have to show us how they've used the funds, and then they're reimbursed for it. So there's definitely some accountability, and we have a good sense of where the money goes.
I think I can say I'd appreciate just having the benefit of learning how the beneficiaries actually use the money, how they benefit from it and how it's used. I think it's something that stories that should be told. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks very much for that, and we will bring this forward on an agenda for awarding these, right? Are we going to do that right away, or are we going to wait for the other?
My recommendation is that you do it right away, and so that we can get these moving and then address the other ones next month.
Everybody good with that? Yep. Okay, thanks. We will move to our second presentation, and that's an update from the Emergency Preparedness Committee. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm Jenny Kurtenitis, the Community Co-Chair for the Emergency Preparedness Committee. The main focus tonight, at our last meeting, we had talked about updating the city code. I can't something that right, but the article for the Preparedness Committee itself. I don't recall when it was exactly drawn up, but it's been a couple of years. Committee has changed a little bit, I think, from maybe not really changed a lot from its original focus per se, but we wanted to update it and make it more in line with what we're actually doing. So I'm just going to run through some of the major changes. A lot of it really was also just paring it down, spelling out of a lot of organizations when you can just say community organizations or government organizations. In the first section D, originally focused on grant writing, and we have not done any grant writing, and we have talked about it here and there about potentially applying for some city grants, and then discussion kind of went into, well, can we as a city committee apply for a grant to do preparedness events or something like that? And we never really came to an answer, but we figured if that's something we are going to do, we'll address it at that point, and we just really want to focus on research and data collection as needed. We've talked about, I guess, the city survey that has a couple of questions, and Jesse, I think you can help me speak to that more specifically, but a couple of questions about how prepared city residents are, one or two questions along those lines, and so we can get that information, find out if the outreach that we've been doing at the fairs and such maybe has made it, I mean, we don't know if that directly makes a difference, but if we're helping to get the message out, we're hoping that will contribute if there is a rise in those numbers from when they did the survey last year, a few years ago, 2 years ago. Okay. Next, section E, the only thing there, we removed the reference to the budget because we do not maintain a budget and don't really have one, and certainly aren't going to be bringing anything to the council that is going to affect the city's budget. So we don't want to, you just pull that out. F, we removed reference just to CERT, the Community Emergency Response Teams, because there are many ways for people to volunteer in a disaster-related, emergency-related, with an organization in the county, and we don't want to just limit that to one. Let's see, section I, we updated. Mainly, it was originally written as council members being present in the city EOC. One, I don't think the city EOC really activates, and if it does, I don't think council members would actually be in there. So we wanted to make it more, in the past you have expressed interest in being involved in exercises and ways to learn more about emergency management, but in the city EOC itself is not exactly the way to do it to you, for you. So if there's a way we can help better connect you with exercises in the county or in the city, I know Washington Adventist Hospital had one last summer, so just something more realistic as what might really happen. And the goal with this is that when we provide our 6-month reports, is that I can just, basically put the bullet and then say, what have we done to achieve this? When looking at trying to put together reports in the past, it didn't quite line up, so it was harder to say, hey, we've got this list of things we're supposed to be doing, but we're not really lined up. We don't really feel like we're accomplishing that. So basically it is more in line with what we're doing. The last piece, the membership piece, we didn't make any changes to. There was some discussion on that about reaching out to Montgomery College, to the business associations, and to Washington Adventist University. And we figured before we actually make them members, it makes sense to meet with them, talk with them, see if there are ways that having them involved in the committee on a regular basis would make sense before we start writing them into a code without even asking them. So it's something that we will definitely be working on in the coming year.
Okay.
That's it.
Sounds like a good approach, and sounds like you've got some good changes in here that will align things with the way they really are. And one thing I did want to ask about, excuse me, you talked a little bit about what you were going to do to see how your outreach has been effective or not using the city survey, and I know that we've got an item coming up later on the agenda about the coming city survey, and one of the areas that's proposed to be removed that was in the first two was the emergency preparedness outreach. Were you thinking that you were going to be looking at the first surveys, or you were going to be relying on having new information to see how your efforts over the last 3 years have been working?
I was not aware that that was a discussion piece to be removed, so we were hoping to compare the both, because that's probably the most representative information we have for this city, because otherwise we haven't really tracked it anywhere else. We bought little clickers that we can use at our, when we go to the events, that we can kind of count how many people we're reaching out to. That's, I don't know how much that's actually telling you, but at least, are we talking to 50 people when we are at an event? Are we talking to 200 people? Just to give us a guide.
So it sounds like it would be helpful to keep it in the survey and know how effective you've been in that outreach.
It would be very helpful.
Sounds like this was good timing.
It was great timing.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for bringing your presentation to us this evening. Last time you were here, I believe we talked about the role of the council during an emergency event. And you mentioned about us not really having a role at the center during that time, but there are certainly advantages that council members can bring, and assistance that council members can bring in reassuring the community and other things. But I don't see where that's included in your plan here. We had asked for that last time.
So.
And some kind of training for the council on what we should be, plan to do in the event of an emergency situation.
Well, I know we gave you the handout, which was kind of maybe a 30,000-foot just outline of when something happens, who is your resource. So that was the first step. We haven't really gotten much farther beyond that.
I didn't see that on your task list, though.
As far as helping to educate the council, you mean?
Right.
Or, I'll be honest, I don't think we wanted to be so bold as saying to educate the council, but certainly.
My recollection is last time we were asking you to be bold, and I would reiterate that.
Okay.
I think as smart as we all are, we certainly need the specialized education that you could help to bring to us.
So in Section D, it kind of dances around that. So providing research, providing information, providing comments.
I'd like you to be very specific about that in here if you could. And it's, I know that FEMA has, spends some time on courses, and maybe your recommendation to the council is for specific training from FEMA, if that's appropriate. I don't know. That's where we depend on you. But some way we should be prepared to play our role during an emergency.
All righty.
That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Daniels, come on.
Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for these thoughts and ideas. I'm lining right up with Councilmember Siemens. Be bold. Having served on the Emergency Preparedness Committee, I think it opened up a whole myriad of things to me that I didn't even know about. I mean, I couldn't spell shelter in place. I mean, I know what those words mean, but all of a sudden, when you need to know what to do about sheltering in place, as a council member, you need to know how to tell your constituents what that means, because they don't know. Having spent several years at the festivals talking to people, they don't know, 3 gallons of water per person per day, things like that. Making a plan, sitting down with the family, those very simple things that Jennifer, and that Ed Corsi knew, and that, some of the members of the committee know. But even though I'd come to the council in years past through the entire month of September and handed them out little pieces of paper. I'm still not sure we know. I know during Sandy, I took it upon myself to keep Ward 3, anybody who had electricity and a computer, updated on what the Weather Channel was saying about where it was going, what we had to do, and what we needed, how we needed to participate as human beings in our own survival. And I don't know that that kind of a storm's going to come up in the next year or so, but it still could, you know. Even Snowmageddon, it was the same thing. And that was one of those times we didn't have electricity so much, we almost had to talk. I always say the 2 cans and a string method. You almost have to go door to door and knock on everyone's door and tell them what's going on. So, you know, as you well know, I'm really serious about emergency preparedness and making sure that people know. And the council knows. I'd like to see the whole council take the Citizens Police Academy, you know, spend the 10 weeks and do that, because that is one eye-opener. You know, and that's a little bit about emergency preparedness. I can see people throwing rotten tomatoes at me right now. They're out of the corner of my eye. But that's, you know.
Only the freshest locally grown things.
Yes, locally grown rotten tomatoes are being chucked at me. But those, the tabletops we talked about, you know, even if we schedule something just for the council for a couple of hours, once a year, twice a year, watch me, there's more tomatoes.
They don't have anything better to do except, you know, to attend exercises.
Yeah.
You know that.
Because I know Ed Corsi said the FEMA material, while it was very good, there were portions of it that were so intense and deep that they were maybe, I don't want to say, they were not graspable. You know, they were too...
We're not that smart.
Well, yeah. You know, I don't want to say boring. I don't want to use that word, but he had said at one of the meetings some of them weren't as good as others. So...
And, I mean, some
be
of
bold.
it is,
Be pushy, assertive, and bold.
Yes, ma'am. So we'll certainly look at that. Easy resources. We do have a bunch of materials down in the police department. So if you ever would like to hand materials out at any ward meetings, or if anybody's looking for information, I know I've mentioned this before, we're always happy to come do presentations at meetings. It's a great filler. If you're looking to fill up an agenda, and we do have handouts and such, and can get more. So we're always happy to be that resource for you.
What we don't have is a coloring book with the mother and father cougar anymore. The coloring book's done. It was such a great, it's such a great piece, because it shows the family what they need to do to sit down as a group and the questions they need to ask, the little kitten cougars and the mom and dad cougar. But I think we're done with them. We only have a few more of those.
We should be able to get more.
You think?
Yeah.
All right.
We've got connections.
There's a whole bunch of this stuff in the back of my car right now.
That too. It's also in Case car or in
Yes,
the
right.
stuff.
Anybody who needs it, it's in my car.
If I may, I mean, I think there are some roles for council that you should be comfortable and know what to do in the case of an emergency, and they're rather limited, because the concept of an emergency is that first responders have certain roles and they just have to know how to do it and go right to it. Nevertheless, you are spokespeople for the community, and you're the connection to the constituents. And there are certain activities that you may need to be called into session to approve some actions in the cases of emergency, about sometimes related to purchasing or how some emergency decisions get made. And those are things that you need to be very knowledgeable about and comfortable. And I think it's some of the things that we can just make sure that, working with the Emergency Preparedness Committee, that come back with some kind of information for you in a short training, I think would work.
Okay. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming once again before the council. Last time you were here, I asked about what type of technology notification system you guys are using, like with smartphones now, to notify Tacoma Park residents. Have you guys talked about that in the committee?
Well, there is Tacoma Park Alert.
Right.
Which can go, to just a non-smartphone. It can go certainly to smartphones, to email, all that. That and the Montgomery County Alert are really the main two resources that we recommend.
Okay.
And I believe if you go onto our page on the city's website, you can find the information to sign up for the TP alert.
Councilmember Schultz.
Let me just turn on my sound here. Add my voice to what's already been spoken about with regard to being bold. Just so you know that there's a number of us up here who are concerned, because I think that residents naturally look to their council members for information, maybe even guidance. Sometimes they ask me for guidance that I have no clue, right? You'd think I was sort of like this omniscient kind of person, but I do the best I can. There seems to be sort of like two situations generically. One are those situations where we know we're probably going to be facing an emergency, and the snow emergency is a classic example of that. And so, those are situations where the city can probably inform people about logical stuff to do, and that's what we all can do well, because we sort of say, well, if it's this sort of thing, you want to prepare for this. If it's this sort of thing, you want to be able to be ready to do that. The problem is that most of the emergencies that happens aren't ones that we know are going to happen, or if we do, they're very short notice, like a tornado. And in those kind of situations, what I find is that the aftermath comes and people want to know what happened, where did it happen, and what can I do, what should I do, should I stay home and or should I shelter in place and all of this. And so I think your city council, the city council members can play a really vital role in helping just get information out to people in whatever ways that we can ingeniously devise, whether it's driving around the neighborhood and talking to people in our car or walking or whatever we do. But it depends on the situation, and these emergencies cover every kind of conceivable situations, and some we haven't conceived of yet. Frankly, I do think, I'll be very blunt about this, that all the literature that gets published, and I've been, when I was on the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee, there was literature, and FEMA pumps out literature, and we've gotten so much literature up here, but I don't think any of that's very valuable. I think it's basically a waste of money and a waste of print, because I think the best way to educate people is to do it visually and orally, because you read these items, you look at them, you put them down, you forget what's in them, and when the emergency comes, you don't go around saying, oh, where's that literature, so that I know what I need to do, because it's probably lost somewhere in somebody's filing system in their house or been thrown away. I just think handing out literature is certainly better than doing nothing at all, obviously. I don't mean to disrespect your efforts in that respect, but I think so much more can be done. And us council members are just one of many avenues that can be followed. And so exploit us. But I would very much, as one, speaking just for myself, I would like to learn a lot more about what is going on in the Emergency Preparedness Committee and how our city's prepared to react, because this whole business of emergency preparedness has gotten a whole lot more sophisticated in the last half dozen years. And there's a lot more technology available than there used to be. And I would frankly just like to be clued into some of that, so that I can at least be aware of who does what with which and to whom in these kind of situations. So, I'm ready to be educated and to participate if it's like what my council colleagues up here have talked about, going riding, learning, meeting some of the people in police department who handle this, or the Montgomery County, or whatever it is, I'd be very interested in doing that. Thank you.
And I'll just add real quickly that I'm tempted to talk with the person or two I know down at the Council of Governments who I work with on the Emergency Preparedness Council and see if there's some simple thing that they can provide. I'm not sure what it would be, but I'll at least explore that and see if there's something that is readily available that might kind of fill in some information. What?
We're looking for simple things for the council.
Yeah, like duh kind of things, right?
So it sounds like we had a suggestion or two for some additional language, and you can work with the city manager, and then we'll schedule that for adoption and change. Thanks very much for your and the committee's work.
Thank you very much.
And we always look forward to your reports.
I always look forward to joining, except I think my pen went
Thank
through
you.
on the table.
We'll now move to special session, where we have a couple of voting items. The first one is a resolution recognizing and appreciating Barry and Annie Solon and Video Americaine, and I'll turn to Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I'll say just a few words and then move the resolution, if that's all right, which is to state, well, we already know that Video Americaine is closing, and to just explain, because there have been questions in the community about the circumstances that the principal owner, Barry Solon, has had health challenges in the last year. And then, of course, the economy for video rental storefronts has changed completely in the world of Internet downloads and streaming and YouTube and all of that kind of stuff. So the Solons have closed other stores, and this is yet another one of the 6 that they had at their peak that is closing. I'm going to digress to say that, as many or most of you know, Summer Delights will also be closing, which is a temporary loss. The owner, Greg Morin, will go back to school, he told me last week, and learn about new dessert-making techniques, and he opens to reopen in Tacoma Park as early as this next summer. He's also had some personal circumstances that made this the right time. And we're gaining by this a new restaurant plan. Jeff Black and colleagues, the Black Restaurant Group, they own restaurants in Bethesda, Garrett Park, Rockville, and so on, are planning to open here. I happen to know this is the 3rd location they looked at in Tacoma Park, so finally they found one that worked for them. So that's a good thing. But I thought I'd mention that because that's a consolidation of the 2 properties, the Video Americaine and the Summer Delights property. So the last thing I'll say is that there will be a community party. I brought forward this resolution at the request of the organizers of that party, who are our neighbors, Denny May, Bob Golden, Susan Schreiber, and Hank Prensky. And the party will be this Friday, January the 11th, at the Video Americaine store at Carroll and Laurel Avenues, 6 to 9 p.m. It's open to anyone. You should bring some food, they ask, just stuff like that. Thank you to Acting City Manager, who has arranged for City TV to cover the event. That's very much appreciated. And there will be some speechifying at 7:30. I won't be able to stay till that point, so I don't know if the mayor or one of my other colleagues would be there to present the city's resolution. And that's it. So I'd like to move this resolution.
Thank you. It's been moved. Somebody want to second it?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Grimes, second by Councilmember Daniels-Cohen. Council comments? I'll say that that Video Americaine really filled a niche in Tacoma Park for a long time, and it's sad to see them go, but I understand completely the changed circumstances, and time marches on. But they were really a valuable addition to Old Town and Tacoma Park, and it was someplace that a lot of people went to many evenings. I saw people going in and out of there all the time, and going into Greg's shop, and it was a kind of a place that you always knew you could just sit on a bench and kind of see the world go by, going in and out of there. Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I also am sorry to see them go. I hope, I'm wishing the best for both businesses and all the human beings involved. I'm going to miss their window, the Video American. I always, at some bizarro window, it was always decorated, and it was always very interesting and quite subtly humorous. So I'll miss that a whole lot, and I'm going to miss Summer Delights. My treat for me, if I really behaved myself, was to go in there and get some homemade ice cream. Get an ice cream cone and sit down out and watch the cars go up and down Carroll Avenue. So I'll miss them both. I'm glad to see that the shops won't go vacant for terribly long. The Blacks have a history of excellence in their business, in their restaurant businesses, and one of the things that was most exciting to me about the change, there was the sad side, they're leaving and closing. They're both a Tacoma tradition, but one of the partners and executive chefs that are going to go into the two locations is a young man that grew up on Sherman Avenue, and he's a hardcore Tacoma Park person. He's come to a lot of Junction meetings. I didn't know why he was there, and now I have an idea that they were looking around Tacoma Park. Danny Wells, and that's exciting for him and for our city to have one of our own residents in charge up in Old Town. I wish they were down at the Junction, but oh well.
Well, maybe Greg can reopen Summer Delights in the Junction.
I'd like to see him open Summer Delights right in the It's a Wonderful Life drugstore on the corner of Grant and Carroll. Right. So that's what that store was originally, was a real It's a Wonderful Life drugstore. So.
Is there any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous passing of the resolution, and I will try and be there to present that. Do you have a time that's supposed to be?
Approximately
7:30. Okay.
And Jamie Raskin is looking into getting some form of state resolution or proclamation.
Okay. Thanks.
Well,
That's great.
Then our our other voting item this evening is a consent agenda, and that has three items: the single reading ordinance authorizing execution of a contract for the exterior home repair program, a resolution providing for an appointment to the Board of Elections, and another resolution providing for appointment to the Tree Commission. Would somebody like to move the consent agenda?
I'll move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schultz, seconded by Councilmember Daniels Cohen. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have.
There's an ordinance.
Oh, single reading, sorry. Single reading ordinance, we need to call a roll. Will the clerk please call a roll?
Mayor Williams?
Aye.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen?
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes?
Aye.
Councilmember Mail?
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz?
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Aye.
And the consent agenda passes unanimously. We will take a short break, and we will come back for our two work session items. We're back, and we have three work session items. And the first one is a discussion of legislative priorities, and we are being joined by Michelle Douglas. Welcome.
Good evening. Happy New Year to everyone. It's good to see you. Happy New Year. Thank you. Yeah. You too. For the record, Michelle Douglas with Public Policy Partners. I wanted to do, hi. I've seen most of you in the last month. I have not seen Terry recently, so good to see you. I wanted to do just a quick piece on hearkening back to last session, and highlight a couple of the things that we worked on together and were successful in, and then talk a little bit about this upcoming session, which, as you mentioned, Mayor, starts this Wednesday at high noon. So we're looking forward to having a very productive session. I wanted to also take some time just to check in with each of you and get a sense of your priorities for the session. So that's sort of what I had come up with. Does that sound like an okay agenda for our discussion? Great. So last year, the city had their own bill that we put in that had to do with allowing the off-sale purchase of beer and wine in Class B restaurants. And it was the first time in over, I think, 100 years that this was allowed in Tacoma Park. We were able to pass the bill with great margins in both the House and the Senate. And in that bill, we did include a 2-year sunset provision to allow the city the opportunity to see whether or not this idea works. So next year, we'll be coming back to you to talk about whether or not you want to lift that sunset provision and allow this law to become permanent, or whether you want to extend the sunset. There are many options you can take. You can either, remove it, extend it, or say this didn't work and the law sunsets. So that's one of the things that we passed just this year. We did work on it for 2 years.
What
Yeah.
is the default if we do nothing? What happens?
If you do nothing, the law expires in 2014. So the sunsets the law. That's a great question. The other top priority we had last year, which will sound familiar for this year, had to do with highway user revenue and trying to ensure that the state did not grab more of the highway user revenue as they had done in previous years, and to preserve what was actually put into the budget. We used every opportunity through legislation that was brought before the legislature to discuss for different proposals related to highway user revenue, related to transportation funding, any opportunity we could find to go in and talk about the urgency of the need for funding for the highway user revenue. We'll be talking more this year about the larger transportation budget in just a few minutes, but we really needed to send the message, and we used a lot of opportunities. Mayor Williams was there a number of times to testify on behalf of the city and MML, and we talked about, the first year or two that these monies were taken by the state, we had, they were talking about, well, you can't, build new roads, you can just patch things. We've gone so far beyond that in the infrastructure, and that was the message that we carried last year. We've gone from, we're not talking about patching roads, we're talking about basic infrastructure and the deterioration that occurs with year after year after year of not actually funding the necessary work and upkeep for the roads, as sidewalks, bridges, et cetera. So that was our message last year. We will continue to talk about that this year and urge the state to move forward to resolve this issue. We also had looked and watched legislation related to stormwater. There were a number of different proposals, none of which at the time impacted the city, but we stay on the lookout for those that will. We know that stormwater is going to come up again this session, and so we are constantly on guard watching out for all of those things. The city did proudly support both the DREAM Act and the Civil Marriage Protection Act, otherwise known as same-gender marriage. And as you know, those all prevailed in referenda this year, so congratulations for being early and strong on those two issues. Moving into this session, the first piece of good news that I have to tell you is that finally the economy is starting to do better. And the state's overall fiscal picture is not nearly as bleak as it has been for the past many years. So, in years past, we've been talking about needing to cut over $1 billion, over $1 billion with a B, every year from the budget for the past many years. And what we've been doing as a state is both cutting our current year budget and working at closing the fiscal, the gap. And I know Councilmember Daniels going, we don't want to talk about fiscal cliffs, but this was, a pretty big gap that we had in the structural budget. And so looking out. And over the past few years, we have worked hard as a state to close that gap. And I'm happy to report that the state will be within $200 million of closing that gap this session. And that is seen as something that's very easily just absorbed. So we expect about $400 million in cuts this year to the budget, which is a far cry less than what we've done over the past many years, while acknowledging that the cuts over the last many years have really strained a lot of state resources and a lot of programs. But the good news is we're not looking at the same level of cuts that we have in the past many years. So that's a piece of bright news for you to start the new year with. There are a few other sort of large issues that I want to bring to your attention. I'm sure you've been reading about them in the newspaper, things that we expect most definitely to come before the General Assembly as some of the large issues. One of them has to do with allowing wind energy to be developed, specifically off the eastern shore near Ocean City. And there were changes made in 2 Senate committees this past week to change the composition of those committees that will likely mean that the bill will come out of the Senate this year and onto the floor for a full vote. That doesn't mean that the bill will necessarily pass. It's one of the governor's initiatives. He's been working on this. This will be year 3 that he's been working on this. And I know that it's a very high priority of the governors to pass this year. There is also a move to abolish the death penalty. Many people may remember that a few years ago we had this debate before the General Assembly, and what they did was narrow some of the circumstances in which the state would then use the death penalty. And there is renewed interest and push to abolish outright the death penalty this year. I heard some of the discussion earlier and some of the public comment about the horrible shootings at Newtown. And there has been a task force that has been going on for the last month, few weeks. I'm sorry, it's not a month, a few weeks, having to do with looking at issues related to mental health treatment, gun safety, looking at trying to restrict again the automatic machine guns and the high capacity magazines that carry all the multiple bullets that make these tragedies even worse than they need to be. And then obviously the other big issue, and something that the city is very keenly interested in, is transportation funding, even beyond the highway user fees. And this has to do with obviously the funding of the Purple Line and the need for the state to come forward with some kind of plan that shows that we have funding dedicated for these new projects so that we don't start losing out on the federal level and lose those federal dollars. I know that I've talked to each of you via email at least and let you know about some of the meetings that the acting city manager and I have had, and other meetings that I've had with the governor's office and a number of key legislators, and really stressing the need, the urgency on getting some additional funding for transportation, and particularly looking at the impact on the city's economic development plan if that were not to happen, and how the idea of the city's economic plan being structured around or being contingent on having the Purple Line stop in the city And so the work that has gone into redevelopment and economic development in this city is contingent on having that stop here. And all of that would be for naught if we do not get the funding for transportations, the additional funding. So that has been an important additional argument that we've been talking about. And it's broader, it's more narrow than the broad economic impact, and it really sort of drives it home into here is the impact in the neighborhood, in addition to creating jobs and all the other things that are talked about. So it was something that Tacoma Park brought to the table, and an issue and a way of messaging it that seemed to resonate with a number of the folks that we've talked with. And so I wanted to let you know that, because I think we'll be looking to all of us, to all of you, to also help carry that message home in Annapolis. There, as you know, last year the governor put in a bill to increase the state sales tax by a penny, and the additional amount would go to be dedicated to the Transportation Trust Fund. That bill never came out of committee. There have also been discussions of, and the recommendation of in 2011 of the Blue Ribbon Commission on Transportation Funding that indicated the need for a 15-cent gas tax increase, 5 cents over 3 years, incrementally. That bill was also not taken up in the committee. There's also discussion now of perhaps a regional transportation authority and a regional transportation tax. So there are a few different proposals that are out there that are discussion points. There's nothing that I could say at this point has solidified on either side. There's other than very strong opposition to raising new taxes. And so it is really going to take a significant collective effort and having a lot of the public as well as elected members supporting and providing political will for the state to move forward in doing this. So this is going to be a big lift, and it's an important lift, and something that I think we need to create a lot of urgency about and help create the political will to get this one done. I will say that I think everybody understands that it needs to be done. It's just not something that is, the public understands the depth of the issue, I think, and many people just strongly oppose raising any taxes. And so that is the complicating factor. It's not so much that people don't know that this needs to be done. It's creating the will to get it done. So my understanding from the council is that is your top priority for this year. And I'll look forward to hearing from you and making sure that we're on the right page with that. We also expect, and I think Susie handed out a page here for you of legislative issues for the 2013 session. So you'll see there are a number of additional issues that have been discussed within the council, have been discussed within my office and the acting city manager, and with other legislators, including those in the District 20 delegation. So we look forward to seeing the bills as they come up and talking with you about what is of interest and how we can support different efforts. And you'll see here, so the top issue that's listed has to do with the increased funding for the Transportation Trust Fund, as well as the highway user fees. We also have an issue that I believe Councilmember Grimes, we have talked about having to do with removing the exemption of banks from payment of personal property tax.
Yeah. I've spoken to Delegate Tom Hucker, who's introduced that in 2 previous years. I've spoken to him very recently, and at least at this point, he does not plan to introduce that again this next year because there isn't sufficient support to move it any further than it moved in past years.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
And I did tell him that if I can get some kind of commitment from him earlier in the year, well before next year's session, that I will attempt to help build that support.
Great.
That's not a city thing necessarily, though.
Yeah, it is a statewide proposal, and I appreciate that. Thank you. There has been, I know, discussion about looking at whether there are state funds available to help the New Hampshire Avenue redevelopment plans, and also for the Tacoma Junction. So looking at some of the development issues related to that and whether there are funds available from the state or avenues we can tap into. So I wanted to check in and see whether that is something that, those would be capital improvement dollars, kind of a capital bond, and didn't know if anyone has requested such a bill from any of the legislators.
Councilmember Grimes.
I've been supporting work by a community kitchen group, and
There's a
through
bill.
Sheila Hickson's
Yes.
office, Sheila Hickson has pre-filed a bond
Yes.
request for $250,000. So that is going in. I don't know if there are any others.
That's the only one I've spotted so far, and it is up and available to read on the General Assembly website. If there are other capital bond requests that have been made, if you could just let me know that would be helpful.
This isn't a bond request, but relating to Tacoma Junction,
Mm-hmm.
the city put in a request to the State Highway Administration for, among other things, the reinstating a crosswalk that used to exist in Tacoma Junction. We haven't heard yet from the State Highway Administration, have we?
Not exactly, but I've been talking with Billy Huang of State Highway, and he's following up on that with me and is looking for a meeting in February related to it. So I'm going to be talking with him tomorrow to find out more information.
So to finish that thought, if we could come up with the money to pay for that through our legislative delegation, that could be helpful. Sitting up here on the podium on the cable TV and so on, I'll ask you all the same.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder whether there's any, this is not a state legislative issue exactly, but two of our state legislators have weighed in support of that request, and whether there's a way we could go even further up the chain directly to the governor's office to pursue that crosswalk request.
Well, I think, there's a couple different things. Partly, we submitted quite a list of things related to Tacoma Junction, so I need to find out a little bit more. I think I should hear tomorrow a little bit more, but certainly it's been part of the way we've looked at this to find out if there's some other ways that we can push getting state money, state bodies, whatever, on the project.
Yeah.
I think a higher priority, at least for me, and certainly higher cost activity also related to the junction was the transfer of the lights from the state to the county, and that's something we know had its dollar cost, and it's part of the agreement framework that we've identified with, I think, a date of 2015 to try to seek funding. And so if we were going to prioritize funding related to transportation at the junction, I would think that we might want to expedite that rather than smaller, or put it together at least.
Yeah, try for both. And then there was the PEPCO part of that equation. But on the subject of the SHA, I realize this list is a very informal one, but on the fourth bullet point, when referring to the very nice, very good idea of restricting funding for 410 in Tacoma Park, I'd prefer to phrase that as restricting funding for road widening of 410, regardless of whether there are additional travel lanes.
The problem with that might be that we may want, at some point, some way to accommodate bicycles, or there's some other kind of issue. So it gets a little bit tricky about how the dimensions work on that. I think we would need to have a conversation among the council to determine what we want in that.
Yeah, along 410, the way to add bicycle lanes, there are two ways. One is to carve out of the the motor vehicle lanes. The other was to narrow the sidewalks, and I don't think either of those is palatable. Therefore, adding bicycle lanes would mean widening the road. So, that's an observation. I have one other thing I want to mention in terms of legislation, which is just to say this is something that I'm personally getting involved in because of a city connection, but it's Election Day voter registration. Once again, Delegate Kirill Resnick has introduced a resolution, and he said today that Jamie Raskin will cross-file it in the Senate. Then apparently Representative Cardin is also reintroducing something he's introduced in the past, that Senator Raskin will also cross-file in the Senate, and there's a coalition of progressive groups in the state that includes the NAACP, Progressive Maryland, Maryland PIRG, so on and so forth, supporting this. And as council members know, I'm entrusted, along with some of the other council members, in promoting Election Day voter registration, among other electoral reform and measures for city municipal governments. And I guess we're going to be discussing that in some weeks. So
Thank you.
that's not, I don't think the city, I'm not suggesting the city take a stand on that, but I thought I'd mention it since it's kind of germane.
And Delegate Resnick's bill has been pre-filed, and
Yeah.
it is
Uh-huh.
also
Yeah, it's
available on the
H. Bill 17, House Bill 17.
Thank you.
If you wanted to, excuse me, go down that list a little bit more, and then I'll make
Sure.
sure we get other questions.
Thank you. I guess what I would say is, not getting into the specific wording, but one of the ways we've been talking about the 410 issue has to do with not adding additional vehicular lanes. So just to clarify in terms of how, we've been talking about it, but looking at what are the avenues to move this issue forward, and making sure there's, a sufficient resolution to it. So we have been looking at a variety of ways to do that. Another big issue, obviously, and this is an issue not just here in Tacoma Park, but statewide, improving the reliability and responsibility of utility companies. In fact, there are a number of bills that are already pre-filed that speak to these issues, and I think we're going to hear an awful lot this session around reliability of utilities, around mandates for utilities. I think that I know that there are a number of bills that get to, fees that are charged for lost usage and tacked onto ratepayers' bills, and wanting to stop some of that. So we are going to see a lot of bills this year. Again, we saw a number last year. I think it's sort of the nature of what's happening with all of the storms that we're having, where these issues are going to keep being predominant. And so you'll see a lot of them where, there are mandates or recommendations to the Public Service Commission about what to and not to authorize for the different regulated utilities in terms of fees. So a number of those are already up, and I'll be sure to let you know as more come along. I know that Delegate Hucker has a bill in that requires WSSC to report leaks to the jurisdictions and make that information public. And that is an issue that I think could have even broader appeal around the state. So stay tuned. It may be something that goes even broader than WSSC, because the same issue occurs in other jurisdictions with other water companies. And then we've talked a bit about the idea of making sure that the old poles that are out there for utility companies, old telephone poles and wires, are labeled or removed, and making sure that you can correctly identify whose pole belongs to whom, so that in the event, you were talking earlier tonight about emergency preparedness, so when there's a storm, when there's an event, you actually know whose wire that is that needs to get repaired. So that I know is of interest. We talked again about the need for increasing the availability of highway user fees, and one of the ways that has been discussed is about looking for ways for municipalities to be able to tax. And so that is something that there was a very minor discussion of last year. There is certainly a work group that's working on some of that, but I think that that push is going to come more and more and more, because as the budgets have been chipped from the top down, the municipalities are the last ones there to absorb the brunt. And at some point, you can't bear that brunt anymore without some relief or some ability to actually bear that. And so I think that there's going to continue to be discussion around the state and in the legislature about what are the taxing authority of municipalities. Are there ways to create additional avenues for municipalities to be able to absorb some of the costs that have been shifted downward or lost? The continued issue of Washington Adventist and wanting to make sure that the city of Tacoma Park continues to have access to good health care continues again this year, and we will be paying attention to all of that and continuing to work with the various players that are involved with the WA campus and any other hospitals that are looking to perhaps relocate or look for an outpatient place. So we are keeping our ears open. We are also working closely with Susie on a regular basis on this issue and looking for ways to ensure that healthcare access remains a real thing here in the city of Tacoma Park.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding the moratorium on standalone emergency rooms, is there any movement on changing that, opening that up?
There's not any movement at the moment. I would say that it's not a permanently closed issue. I think that, in the not-too-distant future, it's something that might be entertained again.
There's no way we can entertain it this session?
I doubt that would be close to successful. But what I would say to you is that it is not something that is permanently closed, and I think in the next year or 2, 3, it's something that can be entertained again.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And let me just add that at this point that my sense is that you have a pretty good handle on that issue and other similar issues since your background and your firm's background comes out of healthcare issues.
Yes, we do. We're quite connected in that. And we're glad to bring that expertise here. I mean, healthcare is such an important thing, and we all need it, right? So we're happy to bring that expertise to you. And then the last thing just on our list has to do with allowing civilians to review the speed camera tickets. And as you've probably heard, the issue is going to be a pretty hot button in Annapolis because of what's been going on in Baltimore City with their speed cameras and the recent finding that their error rate is over 5%, which is unacceptable and way beyond the means of what's allowable, or supposed to be allowable, and that the vendor, which is now going to be changing, was receiving payment for each citation. So it was really providing an incentive to provide additional citations. So there is a huge outcry in the Baltimore metro region related to speed cameras. So while this may seem like it's a narrow issue, it's actually going to be probably caught up in a much larger hot button issue related to speed cameras in general. So we will continue to work to make sure people understand this is a separate and distinct issue. And in fact, perhaps this solution might be helpful for Baltimore City because part of their problem had to do with lack of staff being able to look at these tickets and review them. So we might have some linkages we could make there.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about that linkage because I know that there's been a great reluctance on the part of anybody to bring up any issues related to tweaking speed cameras for fear that it opens up Pandora's box and major changes happen as soon as you get in there.
Yes, and we are at a place, though, given what has become public in the last couple of months in the Baltimore metro area, where there is, just about every day, the front page story relates to this in some fashion. And so there is going to be a serious look at the speed camera issue.
Because the other related issue is resolving the ability to charge late fees.
Right.
Which is something that municipalities have been wanting to have dealt with, but didn't want to open up the issue.
So there could be an opportunity. I would also say that given the blowback from what has been uncovered, that might set that effort back a little bit, but, remains to be seen. We need to
We need to watch it closely.
Yes. Look for opportunities, as we always say. So those are just the beginning list of everything that we're thinking about for this session. And I would really love to hear from you, each of you, about what your thoughts are in terms of what you think on behalf of the city you'd like to be paying particular attention to in the session this year.
I want to make sure that I cover one or two issues that the public brought up earlier in our meeting, and one of them was the request by the young activists to understand how we in the city might do something here, or the state might do something to come up with some kind of a polystyrene food container ban, whether there are any efforts to deal with that on a statewide basis, and if not, kind of potential ways to address that.
And the first thing I would say, and this is without, talking to him, is that this is the kind of effort that Delegate Jim Hubbard from Prince George's typically undertakes. He has a lot to do with environmental health. A large part of his agenda on an annual basis, he was the first bisphenol A person in the state. He undertakes these kinds of measures. So I'm happy to talk to him and get back to you about whether this is something that's being contemplated or whether he's heard of that.
Or whether he needs information.
Yeah, I imagine he has it, but I'll be certain to ask him if you have folks who have terrific information. It sounds like you had a good presentation earlier. I'm happy to
that would be helpful.
Let him know. Sure.
If we can coordinate on that, see if there's something we can do. Also, if you can just remind us, we had some correspondence from somebody talking about issues with retaliatory eviction. If you can just remind us kind of where we are on that. That's something that the city worked on over a couple of years, and we've kind of reached a point where I think we weren't getting much success. And just remind us where we are.
Sure. So there was about 3 years ago, I believe, there was a Delegate Mazier put in a bill that would have helped with this issue and disallowed retaliation for tenants by landlords. We ran into a couple of issues with the bill. The first was what was initially perceived to be a constitutional issue, and they got cleared up eventually with the Attorney General's office with some back and forth. In the meantime, the county, Montgomery County, had a task force going on that was looking at this among some other tenant issues, and the county was not willing at that point to take a position on the bill one way or another, to support the bill at that point, because they wanted to see what the outcome was from the tenant group, the work group, and what their recommendations were. So there were a number of issues, legal and otherwise, that were impacting the ability to move forward on that bill. I know that the report was released last year from the work group. There have not been efforts undertaken since that time to reintroduce the legislation. And I know that there are, we work closely with some of the low-income housing folks, and in particular with the Public Justice Center and some of their efforts around the housing and low-income housing. And my understanding is they also are not seeking to be the ones to put that bill in this year. They have some other related bills going in this year. I haven't heard from anyone else that someone has asked to have that bill put in yet. We'll keep our eyes open for it and certainly alert you if we do see the bill come up, because I know it's something in the past that Councilmember Clay in particular did a lot of work on 3 years ago. So I will certainly let you know.
You know, over the break, I was cleaning my office and finding our legislation on retaliatory evictions from the year 2000. So we've been doing it for a while. But I also haven't seen the kind of ground support that may be necessary to move it very far this time.
Okay.
There was concern, I should just add, there was concern that it not be just in one segment. Part of the issue, the constitutional issue that had to be ironed out, had to do with you couldn't just do it in one jurisdiction. It had to apply more broadly.
Yeah, it can't be municipal-centric, it has to be all
Right.
municipalities.
Right. And there wasn't that kind of, push statewide.
And frankly, a lot of the push for this legislation is coming from outside, from unincorporated Montgomery County, right, in the past couple of years. And they've really been trying to work more from the county side on that. I still don't think it's gotten very far, but that's really where the particular kind of movers and shakers on that issue have been based.
Okay. And just two other quick things. When you were talking about HURs and you said roads and bridges, is your sense that there's been much use of that word in connection with transportation funding? Because my sense is that bridges are an area of transportation funding that when you mention it, people go, oh yeah, we have a backlog of, we know we need to spend a lot of money on bridges, but gee, there's bigger fish to fry at the moment, and so nobody's concentrating on it, and nobody's dealing with that, and it's going to come back to haunt us. And is it an aspect of transportation funding that if you push on it, it'll make it harder to get transportation funding, or will it somehow make it easier?
I'm not sure which it would be. I will tell you that when I have discussions about, we're talking about the underlying infrastructure for roads and bridges, I receive reassuring messages from certain legislators saying, we know that the bridges, we're not going to have a Minnesota accident.
One of the things about bridges is that for the most part, 80% of the bridge repair cost is federally paid.
Right.
And so, it's just the large nature of the cost that still means that there's a good amount of money to put in, but it tends to kind of come out of, it functions a little differently than the other road improvements.
Right, because the way I was thinking about it as you were talking about it was, yes, we've got a deficit of money that's been going into maintenance of roads. On the other hand, in Tacoma Park, I think we've been doing a pretty good job of keeping up with our funding on road repairs. But we know that we have potential bridge projects, too, that have large funding figures attached to them. And even though the feds provide 80%, or 20% is something that is not in our projected budgeting.
Right.
And so it has to be an issue for an awful lot of people. If you're dealing with the most pressing issue of the streets, because people see the potholes in front of their houses, but they don't get down and make like a troll and go under the bridge and look at what's going on as you go over, unless it's something like the Sligo Creek Parkway, the Carroll Avenue Bridge over Sligo Creek Parkway, which we're going to have a presentation on, and the New Hampshire Avenue Bridge and the state highway repairs of those bridges, and we know what a disruption it can be when you just work on them. that it can be an 18-month project where your bridge gets shut down, and what that does to a community. And so I'm just trying to think about the way in which we talk about bridges in connection with transportation funding issues.
I don't know that would be my top point. I think we talk more about the roads, the sidewalks, the snow removal, things that have to do with all of us every day.
Frankly, getting $90,000 or whatever in HUR, doesn't touch a bridge. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And then just one final point, I wanted to remind my colleagues that in connection with tax duplication issues thinking about state legislature, that was one of the requests for the legislative committee this year, was to do something on a statewide basis for a bill for tax duplication to fix it. And the proposed solution at this point is to have the chair of the legislative committee, which happens to be me, appoint a task force, which I will be doing very shortly, for MML to look at the tax duplication issues that are different around the state, so that we as municipalities can come up with an understanding and a potential way forward on requesting some changes in tax duplication
Great.
Law, and that we would want to be prepared to present some options at the June conference in Ocean City, so that if anybody thinks they might want to be a part of that task force, a part of that discussion, to let me know, because I'm going to be naming people for that very shortly.
Great. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, I have a few items that I want to touch on quickly with regard to what Councilmember Smith raised, the emergency room moratorium. I do think that I agree with you that doing anything with this legislative session is really out of the question. But timing-wise, the 2014 session might be a good target, because by that time the hospital will have submitted its revised request to the Maryland Healthcare Commission. And I don't think the Maryland Healthcare Commission will have by that time made a decision, but one way or the other, the idea of the healthcare village that's going to be we hope, left behind for us to utilize. The prime aspect of that, I think, that is of concern is the quality of emergency or urgent care there and how it gets defined. Those are both very nebulous terms that medical professionals seem to understand, but most lay people, including myself, kind of don't understand where the differences lie, but we all understand what we want when we want emergency care. Like, where do I go when I'm having a heart attack? That sort of thing. So that's something I really think that in this coming calendar year, it would be good to see if there's any potential way of getting a bill to move this, to break this moratorium and get it moving. That would be one on my wish list.
I would suggest that we start looking at that in June, to start having some of the discussions that are needed, both legislatively and within the administration.
It's also a part of a discussion if the hospital needs state funds or other kinds of things to do what it wants to do, that we get in on the bargaining of that.
Yeah, that will probably need to be part of it.
Yeah.
Because the hospital's going to say, possibly, well, we agree with you. We'd love to be able to do that. However, it's not going to work. We can't do it. Our pro formas don't perform unless something comes along to help us do it. And with regard to the speed cameras in Baltimore, it's my understanding that one of the big problems there was that a lot of the speed cameras that were being installed weren't being calibrated.
That's
that they
right.
were
That's
just they were way off, and they were creating speeding, violations that were totally.
That's the staffing issue for the calibration.
It's the calibration staffing of the calibration, not.
It's actually both, it turns out.
Okay.
So there's both their error rate, which is related to calibration, but there's also the error rate related to staff review of the citations, which has to do with the resources.
Okay. Because calibration isn't a problem that we're having in
Right.
Montgomery County.
No, it seems to be limited to the one region.
Yeah. Which brings me to another thing, and that is that an awful lot of what happens in Maryland is it takes place in Baltimore City and Annapolis, obviously because of the legislature. But none of the cable services, Comcast, Verizon, RCN, as far as I know, bother to carry any Baltimore channels other than Maryland Public Television. Even though I'm a Marylander, I think we all are, in fact. It just has always struck me as wrong that we're not able to pick up public channels, news channels, for example, from Baltimore City, which tend to report much more heavily on Annapolis issues, because Montgomery County and this whole area with the Washington Post is so D.C.-centric that it's sort of like you don't really live in the state of Maryland some of the time. And I'm wondering, is there any possibility of creating a bill, not maybe this year, but at some point in time, to obligate the cable companies to provide some of these other stations from Annapolis, or preferably even, I'm mainly thinking about Baltimore City. So that
I have not heard discussion of a bill like that.
No, I know there isn't any bill, but I'm thinking about creating one. It's just been frustrating to me.
In the meantime, can I recommend watching the program State Circle on MPT?
Yeah.
Which
7:30 in the evening.
7:30 Friday evening. I DVR it and I always watch it, and it covers everything around the state, and it's great for seeing what's going on in Annapolis.
It does a good, sort of what's the hot topic of the week, and then a little bit of a debate between two sides.
And when the legislature isn't in session, it covers things all over the state.
All over the state.
I guess you talked about earlier on about capital projects. New Hampshire Avenue runs through my ward. It runs through 3 of the wards here, and there's an awful lot that needs to be done on New Hampshire Avenue, and we have access to the Maryland Community Legacy Program to help us do that. But that's limited. And some of the projects that I think that this city would like to be able to pursue probably are much more expansive than that. I have a particular one in mind, but my question isn't so much project specific, but more to you as to how such bond bills get formulated, so that they can even be considered as something that needs to be put into the Maryland budget.
So bond bills are separate from the Maryland budget. Bond bills are put in by the legislators. So what happens is you make a request to a legislator that they put in a particular capital bond bill. And as we finish up the budgeting process in the state, we will also hear, we'll have the operating budget and we have the capital budget. And there will be, bill hearings of every single capital bond bill that comes up in March usually, on a Saturday and a Sunday and a Monday. And so everyone gets about 5 minutes to present their project. And through that, there are a select number of projects that are selected for inclusion in the capital budget. So that's one process. You also mentioned how do you get something put into the budget. So there's, Maryland has a 5-year capital grant planning. So while we look at operating budgets a year at a time, the state plans for the capital budget from the administration, so from different departments, for a 5-year span.
Right.
So part of that is getting in through that 5-year plan, through the department, their capital budget. So if you're talking about transportation, for New Hampshire Avenue, it's engaging in discussions with the Department of Transportation around their capital budget and seeing how you can get inserted into that in that 5-year window. So that's separate and distinct, though, from having a capital bond bill introduced for specific projects.
Okay, thank you. I may
Does
want
that
to
help?
get in touch with you.
Sure.
One-on-one and by email and just explore
Sure.
some things, some ideas that I have.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to cover a couple of issues. Just emphasizing the mayor's comments earlier about the polystyrene issue. I would encourage you to to really express our interest in that and pursuing
Absolutely.
a bill in that area. Just trying to make that even clearer. On the sewage notification, the WSSC notification bills, I think the intent behind those bills is really to create much better both public and then municipal information about ongoing leaks for two reasons. One is because there's an obvious health risk associated with the leak that many people do not know about. But second is that there's a whole theory of change behind public information and that it creates pressure to fix something. And that pressure can be a good thing even for a utility, while it might seem unwelcome at the time, because it potentially builds public support for the sort of investments in infrastructure that utilities ultimately complain about. Somebody like WSSC ultimately complains about. So in terms of following the legislation, and at least in what I hope is a bright future of hearings and progress, trying to make sure that those pieces endure are really critical. And as the council knows, I'm happy to come to Annapolis and speak on those issues. And I have stayed in touch with Delegate Hucker and his staff since their introduction and before. But they're fairly simple bills, and I expect that the utility will say that, well, they've got it covered. You've got adequate information, but trying to maintain those two pieces, both the municipal notification and the public posting requirements, and in particular public posting requirements that are not the typical utility 500 words in 10-point font that no one can understand, but something that people can really grasp. The last issue I wanted to bring up, you identified it as an obvious area of interest and focus. It concerns guns and regulation. And I think while the preference would be for action at the state level, at least I would express my interest that while it's less preferable than some sort of blanket and probably more effective approach, if a fallback is just that there's ways to create flexibility for municipalities to do different things, that if that's what we have to settle for, that might still be at least a small step in the right direction. I'm hoping for bigger things from the task force that's working and from the legislature, and the governor. But that municipal piece might be important as well.
That's helpful, thank you. And just so that you know, I actually will be seeing Delegate Hubbard tomorrow evening, so I'm already planning on talking to him about the polystyrene tomorrow night.
Great, thank you.
And if I can just add on the gun issue, I don't remember what year it was, but it was a number of years ago where the we had a gun task force, and the council explored ways in which we could restrict guns in the city of Tacoma Park, and I think okay. Yeah, we had great difficulty in coming up with a way that we could do that given state law. We were trying to craft restrictions for, I think, within a certain distance of certain facilities where children were present, and it became impossible.
Well, for example, our law does have differences compared to the county law. The county law allows handguns with a permit in public places, whereas our law doesn't have that exception. It just prohibits handguns possession or transport of handguns in public places, period. The county has this, unless permitted, which essentially makes it meaningless. So at least on the books, we have some differences.
Yeah. And actually, Jamie Raskin was on that group all those years ago, so, but you're right, there's that difference.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Michelle, I met with Bruce Baker on Saturday. He's the gentleman that has put together the application for Montgomery County and the HEZ. Have you had any updates, anything going on with the Health Enterprise Zone?
Right. No, I have not, but I imagine, with session starting, there will be some briefings coming up, so if there is one particularly on that, I will let you know.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Is that good?
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Daniels comment.
And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Could I just?
Sure.
Could I add one more thing? I will just also let you know, I think I did via email that we mentioned again to Chairwoman Hickson about the interest.
Great. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm gonna underline polystyrene.
Okay.
Because the Young Activist Club has been working, I guess this could be the fourth year. Is it?
At least.
At least the fourth year, if not longer than that, within the county of Montgomery to get the polystyrene trays out of their elementary school right next door and have us and get a dishwasher. And of course, the county council, how do I say this politically correctly, didn't accept their stand. And they came to us, and it's a matter of education. I think that people just don't know how destructive polystyrenes are. I think it's educational. I think if people knew that they were poisonous and created unhealthy situations, they would certainly adjust how they package things up. I know there are several of the restaurants within the city limits of Tacoma Park that have changed their packaging and things like that. So if you are going to see, it was Jim Hubbard, or
yes,
if you're going to see him, these are very passionate. That's one of the overused words, I think, at the term.
He is very passionate.
Yes, they're very passionate about the environment. It's pretty exciting to sit in a room full of, there must have been 20 or 25 elementary school students that were just like thrilled with what they were talking about and speaking very intelligently. It's when they're all in the room here together at the same time, it's pretty impressive. You can't say no to them exactly. So.
Well, I'm also happy to, if you have a particular contact for them, if there's a way for me to connect them with Delegate Hubbard so that they can also present to him in person, if that's something that he has time on his calendar.
Yeah, Nadine, right?
So I will talk to him about that also.
Okay, great. I mean, the gun issue goes without saying. I mean, we don't have to say any more about that. That's also pretty dangerous. Doesn't produce greenhouse gases necessarily, but it's pretty dangerous stuff.
Pretty dangerous to one's health.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Could I say a few things? Once the session gets underway, things can move very quickly. Those of you who've dealt with that before are familiar with that. There's a couple of things that happen internally. We requests for information on fiscal notes for bills. It can be a decent amount of internal work to say how much some proposal might cost the city government, and you need to let the state know so that the legislators have a sense of the financial impact on municipalities or counties or whomever with that. There's also just kind of the work of talking with the legislators or determining the city's positions. This year I'm going to be pretty busy doing other things. And so Michelle and I have talked about her taking more of an active lead directly with the council on some of the back and forth about the sessions. We'll figure out a way to do that so you get kind of more direct kind of updates from her and communicate more directly with her as opposed to having information going through me. I'd like to be copied. I'm happy to take, be active in some of the bigger items, but I think just for my sanity, I think that's going to have to be how it works. And Michelle's familiar enough now with the city of Tacoma Park. I don't think that there's any problem with that. There's one other thing I was going to think of. Oh, well, we'll just keep you apprised as these various items come up. Who else going on Wednesday? Jarrett, you're going. Bruce? Fred? Okay, great. Terry?
Wonderful.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm not going in the daytime. I'm just
Going in the
to
nighttime.
party. Yeah.
That's what's going on in the daytime, too.
That's right. At about 12:05.
Let me just say, Michelle, since you're going to be taking a little bit more of a role, is that I have gone, will travel, so to speak.
Yes.
That's
not
Styrofoam will travel.
Bad choice of word. I'm ready to go to Annapolis.
Thank you.
And speak, put the words in my mouth and I will speak them.
Thank you. And to underscore Susie's point about expediency, we end up with about 2,500 bills in that 90-day period, and the budget, and then all the amendments. And so, and as we get deeper into session, we have less and less notice of when things will happen. So, as Susie will attest to, I'm sort of in communication with her 24/7, except for maybe 3 hours a night, literally. So you may want to put your smartphones on vibrate or silent once you decide to retire for the evening, but note that I will persist in following up.
And I did pass along the link to the revised website for the General Assembly. There's some nice techniques to use with that, and some of the more handy documents are more easily accessed. So,
And a reminder that starting next week, we're going to have the legislative update back as the regular agenda item on the meeting agendas, so that if we need to update anything, we can. And today was the first rollout of consideration of bills by the legislative committee, and so I provided those links to Susie, who then provides them to Michelle. And if there's anything that the council needs to know, I will pass those along as well. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and I really appreciate the opportunity to continue to represent you. It's great. And I will also get back to you for my discussion tomorrow evening with Delegate Hubbard, to let you know if he already has something
Thanks.
coming up.
We
Okay.
appreciate all the work that you do.
Sure. Likewise. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
And we have 2 items remaining on our agenda. And the first one is briefing on the coming resident survey questions.
yes, I've shared with you kind of a markup of our most recent resident survey, which was done in 2009. The goal of the surveys is to, on a relatively regular basis, every 2 or 3 years, find out from our residents kind of what they think about life in the city, city services, and see if, when we get these surveys back, we try to make improvements, we try to identify problems that can be resolved. One of the things that I find particularly of interest is all of the free answers that come from the open-ended questions, which identify things about a particular intersection that somehow never got to the point where somebody calls it into the police, but there's a problem, or whatever. So we end up getting it, besides kind of addressing city service questions, finding out a lot of other things to correct or to fix, and I find them very useful. Besides the standard questions, we've, in the 2 prior surveys that we've done, had sometimes some special questions to ask. The emergency management ones were designed to, I thought was for one of those one-time kind of special questions. There's only a few of the questions. I don't see a problem. There is some extra room, I think, in the new survey that we can add them back in. But that's, we have, I think, a good amount of flexibility about asking a few extra questions. I did try to address 2 issues that had been raised with me. One was by our consultant related to the hospital, which identified that there simply was not information about how do our residents use the hospital, Washington Adventist Hospital, or personnel related that are kind of associated with the hospital. We have people saying, oh, I use it all the time, or that's my doctor's hospital. At the same time, we hear folks saying, well, my doctor does use that hospital, but he's now moved out to Cherry Hill Road, or whatever, kind of in anticipation of the hospital moving. And part of what we don't know is what is the reliance on the hospital services, what kinds of services, and the staff that may be somewhat associated with the hospital but aren't hospital statistics. The hospital staff themselves would like to know this information. And I had run the questions also past the president and Rob Jepson, and they think that they would be very useful to see the results of those questions. The other series of questions that I kind of sprinkled in here that were suggested by staff of the National Research Center were to address issues that were raised by 2 of the council members in particular about reaching seniors, what kind of needs seniors have in our community. Is there a sense of isolation? Are there social services that are needed? And also questions related to just people in apartment buildings and how, do they feel like they're connected into the community, and do they need some kind of services? So I've taken some of the questions that were suggested by the staff person at NRC and put those in here. I hadn't heard from anybody about these so far, but if there's some suggestions that you have with these, if there's another topic you want considered, please let me know. I'll leave it right now.
I thought this looked pretty good. The question, I'll just try and take less than 60 seconds to just share the thought process I had after I looked at it. I thought, gee, it would be interesting to fill it out. Mm-hmm. I've never had that opportunity.
That's right. You keep getting this.
Some council members got both of them, both 2007 and 2009. And how do they determine the numbers that get sent out? I know that they're looking for the broad section of response, and if they're not getting it from certain areas, they resend and they retry and they go after it. Is there a danger in sending out more of them? In terms of how you compute the results?
I will find out. They do send out quite a few. They do oversample multifamily units. So the folks that live in apartments tend to be less responsive in filling out surveys. And for that reason, they send out a higher proportion. Nevertheless, they've sent out a lot. I think you just were not lucky.
Having worked on some of these things, I think that the rule is that there just isn't much gain in sending out more than you need to get a statistical projection.
What's the response rate?
You know, I forgot. I think it was 35%, 38%. It was a good. It was
I
a
remember
solid.
it as being
was
a
in the
good
30s.
response rate.
It was a good response rate.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. Just a few quick comments. The questions about, which I think are meant to address older residents around, feeling productive, meaningful. Yeah, I guess I would want those questions to be somewhat less of a push question. So, we ask, are you feeling lonely or isolated? But we don't ask, are you feeling happy and connected? And so finding a way to ask the question in a more neutral frame. On the question on the issue of the hospital, I just am I'm sensitive to how long this survey is. And so, anywhere you can get rid of text and still get a good answer is important. We provide a lot of background about the hospital moving, but that's not actually necessary for somebody to tell you whether they've ever been an inpatient. And so we could leave off that background and still find out whether people have once, twice, 6 times, et cetera, been an inpatient. There's not very many questions on sustainability, and I'm not sure exactly what those would be, but there might be some value in asking some questions.
Okay.
Similarly, I did not see, although it was a quick read, any questions relating to sidewalks and sort of pedestrian safety, which might
You
be
don't have to ask.
it could be. I would be interested in if there was a way to, given the presentation we had by the Safe Grow Zone Initiative, there was a way to ask a question about, are you concerned about exposure to chemicals or exposure to pesticides, something like that. It might be a way for us to judge community support for work in that area, given that it's a timely thing. And then my last comment would be, I want to make sure that we have a system in place so that when the survey is done, that we get not just the consultant's report, but we get all the data. And ideally, I think the public gets all the data. Now, not the data that's recognizable to a homeowner, but let's say to a ward or something. So it essentially becomes a data file that somebody in Tacoma Park can use 10 years from now or 20 years from now, a university academic can use to compare long-term trends. And that's one of the advantages of doing these surveys is that you create a trend, but you can only track those trends if the data is actually there. And then the one last comment I had was on the, given that, and again, I may have missed this, but I think we should ask a question about the city's website, given that we're about to go through
I've got some in there.
a revamp. And so, okay, great, it's here. Thank you.
It's in here.
Yeah.
That's my quick.
There's a little
quick
bit
list.
on that. And, it is awkward when we're right in the middle of something to send out a survey. On the other hand, at some point you have to send out a survey. The other thing is that these have been tagged by ward. One of the things, we are doing a redistricting. One of the things that depending on how the public hearing goes next week, we may want to use the new redistrict boundaries for the tagging of these questionnaires. So just kind of letting you know that I was thinking, it's always tough to pick when to send these things out. But both of those things have been in my mind.
And just one quick comment regarding one of Councilmember Mayo's questions. I do remember on the previous surveys getting basically the raw data,
There's a lot of data.
There was
By
additional,
ward, by different kind of
and
age.
even down to the single word responses where they had a chance to write something, we saw them all.
That's great. And just make sure that they endure somewhere that future council people 3 generations from now can find them.
Right. Yeah, that was a problem. Yeah.
Future council members 3 generations from now will be able to receive them into the chip in their head.
Yeah.
Aren't they lucky?
Councilmember Daniel Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to, you may have covered this, City Manager Ludlow, but I'm going to request emergency preparedness, that one small section be put back in. It's really important. And there's something that on question in the original one, question 22, if you answer no, go directly to question 25. I think that should be, how do I say this, struck. Because you should have answers to 23 and 24, so you know, we don't have any supplies, yes, we have some supplies, don't know, I mean, those are important answers to get back from residents.
Might not even need 22.
Yeah, are you aware of the household should have 3-day supply of food, water, medicine? I mean, then
Yeah, you could combine it. You could
yeah,
combine it.
yes, because that can make it smaller. But I think that's a really important section that we really do need to know a little bit about how people know about emergency preparedness. And the rest of it looked pretty good. A little bit more sustainability. I mean, that's a totally major thrust. I'm really happy to see we've included something about us old people. So, yeah. And that's it for my side of the mountain.
Councilmember Schultz.
So the last survey was done in 2009. So then, in effect, we will have had a 4-year span. And I'm just wondering,
Well, it was kind of it was the very end of 2009, and this would be the beginning of, it's more like 3 years, but.
okay, but I'm just thinking what kind of thought has been gone into about promoting this survey? You know, the U.S. Census was doing all kinds of promotional stuff on television nationwide to kind of get people all fired up and excited about something that, you know, was important to get people to participate in. And I'm wondering that, given the fact that we've got a little bit better electronic connectivity with our citizens than, say, we did in 2009, just because of the proliferation of smartphones and tablets, and have we given a lot of thought yet to how we can kind of pump up and get people excited about the chance to get one of these surveys and fill it out and all that kind of stuff?
We have not. However, people tend to be more interested in these than something like the census because they think it's actually, you know, can result in some improvements in their neighborhood.
Do they really? I understand.
But we would be giving, you know, we would be pushing out the word that they're coming, they could look for them, there would be something in the newsletter. I mean, you know, there will be some, you can help pump it up.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll do our part, obviously, each of us, you know. But
give it to Bruce; he'll fill it out for you.
I was going to suggest that we put Councilmember Daniels Cohen in some kind of outfit that I'm sure she already has, and put her out on the streets soliciting.
Wearing a sandwich board, soliciting. I'll do it.
All right, I'm out of here.
But you know, the goal the goal is always to try to increase the percentage return, because the more returns we get, the more accurate can be our understanding of what's.
I'm also going to inquire too about, although I think it will still be a mailed survey because of the way that they do the oversampling, we may have an option to respond electronically because some people prefer that, and I'll find out about that.
Okay.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions and comments. On the hospital, can we add a question if people actually have insurance that are using the hospital? Over the summer, County Council Member Valerie Irvin had a forum on food security. Can we have some questions regarding that?
Can you give me some examples of questions, or you want to send me some?
I can send you some.
Okay. Both, please.
And finally, question on parking. Since we're having these issues where people are requesting no parking zones. I would like to know if there are other areas within the city that are having problems with parking,
What kind of problem?
where
They can't find a place?
Right.
That they want to find?
they can't find a place, people blocking their driveway, those type of issues.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I would like to thank Councilmember Smith for his suggestion about adding food security questions on the survey. That's something I think would be very helpful to the community to understand just what is the level of need for food in the city. I worked with the Tacoma Foundation and Adventist Community Services a couple of years ago, putting together a food security survey that unfortunately we never were able to get enough person power to actually do the random sampling that's necessary to provide meaningful results. I can share that information with you. It was actually put together with the help of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's a survey that they felt would be comparable, allow us to compare the results within the city to results from other places in the country to get a good sense of what is the need for food. So I will share that with you, and it's not a whole long list of questions. Thank you.
Thanks. What I'll do is I'll take this back, fiddle around with it with our with the staff from NRC, try to keep it in a reasonable length, and run it past you again.
Super.
Thanks.
Okay, good. We have one remaining item tonight, and that is discussing appointments to COG policy boards and committees and the Volunteer Fire Department Board of Directors. This is the time every year when COG kind of goes through its annual cycle and changes committee chairs, and there's an opportunity for members to shuffle around. We have the current official appointments in front of us. We know that we have some slots to fill. I think we have potentially, did we shuffle any of these mid-year when Councilmember Snipper resigned? Did we just say alternates we're going to cover? And what do we want to do with these?
It got shuffled up for the Transportation Planning Board, although I don't think there was a vote on that. I think it was just a discussion.
Right. So
and we notified them.
Did
but
we
apparently
did we
didn't
have
take.
did we have you as primary and somebody else as alternate?
No, there wasn't any.
So it was just essentially you were the alternate, but you became the primary. And did we have any other change on the Human Services and Public Safety Policy Committee?
I don't believe so.
I would like to serve on that committee, if that's possible.
Okay, because I know that you don't have any, and Kay is the alternate on one, and are people happy with what they got? Are they able to cover what they've got? Anybody want to make any changes? I know Councilmember Smith sounds like would like to be the alternate on the Human Services and Public Safety Policy Committee. Anybody feeling
That would be great.
burdened or wanting more, or?
I'm pretty happy with the Region Forward Coalition. I can keep doing the Air Quality Committee, although if someone else were to want it, I wouldn't fight them on it. It's been a pretty interesting discussion. There's a lot of work that, there's just a lot of complicated reports that people have been presenting on, which are pretty interesting to look at. Sort of offer that up. But I'm also happy
And that's a monthly?
It's monthly, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've probably been able to make about half the meetings.
The board, the Transportation Planning Board, and MWAC are all monthly. The other ones tend to be quarterly.
I've made maybe half since from the fall.
So it sounds like Councilmember Smith, you want to be alternate on Human Services and Public Safety.
That's correct.
Any other wishes, desires,
I'm happy.
changes? Stick with what we've got with that change. Anybody want to be back up on Transportation Planning Board or MWAC, since those are monthly and it can be hard to make them all?
Can't make the times.
How often does the Chesapeake Bay Committee meet?
Bi-monthly, it says.
It says bi-monthly.
Yeah, I think that is true.
Where does it say down
On another page.
Next page.
Page.
there? Oh, I don't want to have to go that far. So that's fine.
I tend to make most of those, but not all. And Councilmember Daniels Cohen, I think, did you?
Because I know you're going, I haven't gone. But if you're not going to go, tell me, I'll go.
Mhm.
All right?
I was trying to remember if there had been one where I said I wasn't going and you did.
No.
Okay.
But I'm also on the Maryland Municipal League Convention Planning Committee, which isn't on this list.
That's because it's not our call. And Councilmember Siemens has had the opportunity to cover board meetings on occasion, and we'll be covering it this week on Wednesday when I'm in Annapolis.
When you're down in Annapolis, I didn't know party.
I'm also working. I have 2 meetings there.
Either Bruce or Fred, if either of you were interested in switching and taking the air quality in exchange for your current space, I would do that, but again, it's not
Well,
a strong
I
passion.
had been serving on the Air Quality Committee and got off of it because I couldn't understand.
Oh, that was your smile before.
I just literally was just, so much of it was over my head.
Yeah.
And it is very technical, but it's really important because that committee, COG, has so much power to influence. They really have power when it comes to air quality.
Mhm.
I mean, this is just not, like.
That's right, yeah.
So I just felt like I wasn't able to do my job there.
Okay. I'm fine with it.
And I'm happy with what I've
Yeah.
got. So it sounds like adding Councilmember Smith as an alternate, and other than that, we're in pretty good shape. And then on the fire department, I think Councilmember Daniels Cohen and I are happy with our slots there, and they've just moved their monthly meetings to accommodate our schedules. So, any objection to keeping that as is? Okay, so I think we've got our appointments, and we will, the clerk will notify the powers that be that that's what they are, and we're all set.
For what it's worth, I'm also on the Crossroads Development Authority Board, so I kind of met everyone. But I don't think that needs to be on here necessarily.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of our meeting. We're adjourned.
Love it, love it, love it. Happy New Year.